This video describes a crestal sinus elevation procedure using the Deplaque 4.4 mm 2-degree tapered crestal sinus elevation sequential drilling protocol with a sinus elevation practice model to illustrate how the reverse threaded depth stop drills advance bone particles from the osteotomy forward, elevating the sinus membrane. A crestal sinus elevation is a surgical procedure used to increase the vertical height of bone in the posterior maxilla when residual bone height meets or exceeds 5 mm for dental implant placement. When the presence of blood vessels within the wall may present challenges for a lateral window approach, a sinus elevation may be addressed for dental implant placement through a crestal opening into the floor of the sinus. Here are optional drill protocols: osteotome with or without treff fine drills, versa drills, or reverse threaded drills. A 2-degree tapered 4.4 mm depth stop drill set for sinus elevation includes color-coded drills that increase in 1 mm increments with lengths from 4 mm to 10 mm with diameters of 1.5 to 4.7 mm. The largest black colored drills will not fit into the 4.5 mm guide sleeve. Therefore, they must be used freehand. The 4.4 mm depth stop drill set is stored in a metal container that measures 3 5/8 by 4 1/4 by 2 3/4 inches. Made of stainless steel and PVD coated, it is designed to autoclave and store the drills. Millimeter drill sizes are inscribed on the drill tray box for easy identification. A steel metal block is available to be placed in the freezer for 1 hour prior to use for a maximum cold drilling protocol, and will maintain cold drill temperatures when removed from the freezer, resulting in less damage to the bone and less discomfort for the patient. This slide illustrates a case using the 4.4 mm crestal sinus elevation sequential drilling protocol. Drilling is initiated in crestal bone approximately 5 to 6 mm thick with drills 1.5 to 2.2 mm up to 6 mm long. All drills are used with rotation at 800 to 1,000 revolutions per minute with irrigation in the direction indicated on the box. Once the floor of the sinus is reached, the drill flutes push the bone particles apically through the opening in the bone below the sinus membrane, while avoiding puncturing the membrane. The 0.75 to 1.5 mm double-ended crestal sinus elevation probe is available and recommended for use in the crestal sinus elevation protocol. One end is 0.75 mm diameter, and the other end is 1.5 mm in diameter. The small diameter probe tip is used to determine if the 1.5 to 2.2 mm drill tip has penetrated the crestal bone and if the membrane feels soft. If the opening feels soft with the small probe and still feels hard with the larger 1.5 mm probe, the bone has not been penetrated, and it suggests you are at the level of the sinus membrane. The sinus elevation practice models illustrate the thickness of the sinus floor with a simulated lining similar to a sinus membrane. The number of dots on the surface indicate the thickness of the sinus floor. For example, 5 dots equals 5 mm. A crestal approach should be used for the sinus elevation protocol in sites with at least 5 to 6 mm of crestal bone height. A sinus floor with 2 to 3 mm bone thickness is not a good choice for the crestal approach to sinus elevation. Why not? Because there may not be enough bone to stabilize the implant. The 4.4 mm depth stop crestal sinus elevation drill series begins with the starting drills illustrated here. They are designed with 1.5 to 2.2 mm outside diameter and from 4 to 10 mm long. The following is a step-by-step protocol for a simulated crestal sinus elevation using the sinus elevation practice model. The drill lengths increase in 1 mm length intervals and are used until the floor of the sinus is reached, always drilling to the level of the depth stop. Step 1. Start with the first gold drill, which is 5 to 2.2 mm by 4 mm long. Drill to the level of the depth stop. Now use both ends of the double-ended probe to check for bone penetration. Step 2. Continue with the second gold 1.5 to 2.2 mm by 5 mm long drill. remembering that the drill lengths increasing in 1 millimeter intervals are used until the floor of the sinus is reached, always drilling to the level of the depth stop. Again, use both ends of the double-ended probe to check for the bone penetration. Step 3. Continue with the third gold 1.5 to 2.2 millimeters by 6 millimeter long drill, remembering again that the drill lengths increasing in 1 millimeter intervals are used until the floor of the sinus is reached. In this simulated case, it is 6 millimeters. Always drill to the level of the depth stop. To verify an intact membrane, the sinus membrane can be checked using the Valsalva maneuver by pinching the patient's nose and having them try to blow their nose while you watch to see if any bubbles escape from the osteotomy site. If a 1.5 millimeter to 2.2 millimeter depth stop drill results in a perforation of the membrane, the next larger diameter drills to be used should be 1 millimeter shorter so we don't open the floor of the sinus as far as the perforation has occurred. Step 4. Proceed with the 2.0 to 2.9 millimeter by 6 millimeter long rose drill for a 3.3 millimeters diameter implant. Drill to the level of the depth stop. The use of each larger diameter drill removes bone particles and pushes them forward to lift the sinus membrane without penetrating it. Use the 2 millimeter end of the probe to check the membrane status. Step 5. Proceed with the 2.7 to 3.2 millimeter by 6 millimeters long blue drill. Drill to the level of the depth stop, continuing to lift the sinus membrane without penetrating it. Again, check for the membrane status with the 2 millimeter end of the probe. Step 6. Proceed with the 3.0 to 3.9 by 6 millimeter long silver drill for a 4.1 millimeter implant placement. Drill to the level of the depth stop. With this larger diameter, continue to lift the sinus membrane without penetrating it. Use the 2 millimeter end of the probe to check the membrane status. Step 7. Do not proceed with the next larger diameter drill unless you are planning to place a 5 millimeter or larger implant. With the 3.7 to 4.7 millimeter by 7 millimeter long black drill, drill to the level of the depth stop. With this larger diameter, continue to lift the sinus membrane without penetrating it. The previous drills should have already pushed enough bone particles forward so you can proceed to the 7 millimeter by 1 millimeter longer drill before adding additional graft material. The planned diameter of the implant to be placed indicates the diameter of the osteotomy and the drills to be used to prepare the osteotomy. If an immediate implant placement is intended, it is important that the osteotomy size remains smaller than the implant's diameter. An adjustable depth stop plugger has been developed with a concave tip at either end of the handle. One end has a 2.5 millimeter outside diameter tip, and a larger 3.5 millimeter outside diameter tip for larger openings. Each end is concave and is used to push additional graft material through the osteotomy, elevating the sinus membrane. The smaller tip of the plugger is threaded and has an adjustable stop nut to prevent pushing the plugger past the level of the bone. Only the graft material should be pushed beyond the level of the bone to protect the membrane and elevate the sinus. As illustrated here, each piece of collagen-based material osteogen with or without BMP2 is placed with a collage pliers and amp, pressed in with the adjustable concave plugger. Steps to completing a Crestal sinus elevation with implant placement. First, from an X-ray image, estimate the thickness of the bone to determine the length of the initial drill to be used. Second, if the procedure is to be completed flapless, in determining the thickness, combine both the thickness of the soft tissue and of the alveolar bone. Third, initiate the procedure using the 1.5 to 2.2 millimeters by 4 to 10 millimeter long gold drill series. Fourth, using the 1.5 millimeter larger end of the double-ended probe, check the depth of the osteotomy to see if the floor of the sinus has been breached by feeling if the drill has perforated the sinus floor after each drill is used until you feel the membrane. The drills should not penetrate the floor of the sinus by more than 1 millimeter before increasing the diameter of the drill series. Sometimes, implants may need to be placed with a mesial inclination because the patient is unable to open wide enough to place them vertically using a lateral window, as shown in this image. A lateral opening was impossible, so the Crestal approach may have to be used. Note the narrow sinus before grafting in the image on the left, and in the right image, the narrow sinus after the Crestal elevation was completed. In this case, an open lateral window sinus elevation was not suitable because the patient could not open wide enough. Here is an example of a Crestal sinus elevation starting with 5 millimeters of bone. And here is a Crestal sinus elevation with an implant placement. Another example of a Crestal sinus elevation with immediate implant placement. Here we can see a Crestal sinus elevation with 6 to 7 millimeters of Crestal bone. Five millimeters of Crestal bone plus 5 millimeters of elevation.